The year was 1971. A man known then only as Dan Cooper stepped onto Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, bound for Seattle. His demeanor was unremarkable, a quiet figure among the usual bustle of travelers. He wore a dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a neatly tied black tie, projecting an image of understated professionalism. His face, partially obscured by dark sunglasses, revealed little of the intricate plot brewing behind his calm exterior. He settled into seat 18C, a seemingly ordinary passenger embarking on a routine journey, yet within his briefcase lay not documents or leisure reading, but the blueprint for an audacious crime that would baffle authorities for decades. The hum of the engines beginning their ascent provided a deceptive lull, masking the impending storm. As the Boeing 727 gracefully climbed into the crisp November sky, Cooper summoned a flight attendant, a young woman named Florence Schaffner. His request for a drink was typical, but the small folded note he handed her was anything but. Florence, accustomed to polite exchanges, tucked the note unopened into her pocket, assuming it was a discarded piece of paper or perhaps a flirtatious message. Cooper, however, leaned in, his voice a low, steady murmur. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." The words, delivered without a hint of malice or panic, struck Florence with an icy dread that transcended the mundane reality of her job. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a stark contrast to the quiet composure of the man beside her. With trembling hands, Florence unfolded the note. The stark block letters confirmed Cooper's chilling declaration. He possessed a bomb in his briefcase, and he was prepared to use it. The world outside the airplane's windows, a serene canvas of clouds and distant landscapes, suddenly felt impossibly far away. The cabin, filled with unsuspecting passengers, transformed into a confined space of unimaginable peril. Cooper, observing her reaction, calmly opened his briefcase just enough for Florence to glimpse what appeared to be red sticks of dynamite wired to a battery. The sight solidified the terrifying reality of the situation. This was no prank, no idle threat. He then laid out his demands with unnerving precision. $200, Rousen dollars in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, 2 main and 2 reserve, and a fuel truck ready upon landing in Seattle. The sheer audacity of his plan was breathtaking, an unprecedented act of air piracy. Florence, though shaken, maintained her composure, relaying the demands to the cockpit, initiating a chain of events that would soon engulf the entire Pacific Northwest in a frantic search. The pilot, Captain William Scott, immediately contacted air traffic control, setting in motion a desperate scramble on the ground to meet the hijackers' terms. The passengers remained blissfully unaware, their conversations and laughter echoing through the cabin, a stark, unsettling counterpoint to the high-stakes drama unfolding in the cockpit and at Cooper's seat. Florence, returning to him, tried to engage him, to understand the man behind the terrifying request. Cooper remained stoic, his eyes unreadable behind the sunglasses, revealing nothing but a singular, unwavering focus. The plane continued its journey, now not merely a mode of transport, but a vessel held hostage by a man with an unimaginable endgame. The chilling revelation of his ultimate plan began to dawn on those privy to his demands. He intended to jump from the plane, vanishing into the night, leaving behind a mystery that would captivate and confound the world. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Cooper's voice, calm and unhurried, now dictated the precise terms of his ransom delivery. He instructed the flight crew to inform air traffic control that the plane must land at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, where the money and parachutes were to be delivered directly to the aircraft. His meticulous instructions extended to the flight path itself, demanding that the plane remain below a certain altitude and maintain a specific speed, details that hinted at an intricate knowledge of aviation. The specificity of his demands underscored his calculated nature, revealing a mind that had meticulously planned every facet of this audacious crime. There was no room for negotiation, no sign of wavering in his resolve. The tension aboard Flight 305 became almost palpable as the Boeing 727 began its descent towards Seattle. Below, a flurry of activity unfolded as law enforcement agencies scrambled to gather the requested ransom and parachutes. The FBI, now fully engaged, Coordinated efforts, their agents moving with a frenetic energy that contrasted sharply with Cooper's cool demeanor. Upon landing, the scene was surreal. The massive aircraft sat isolated on the tarmac, surrounded by emergency vehicles and armed personnel. Yet the exchange itself was a quiet, almost ceremonial affair. A ground crew delivered the duffel bag filled with $200 in unmarked $20 bills and the 4 parachutes to the plane. Cooper carefully inspected the contents, his eyes scanning the stacks of cash and examining the parachutes with an expert's discerning gaze. He then, as promised, released all the passengers, allowing them to disembark and escape the surreal drama that had enveloped them. Their relief was immense, a collective exhale that swept through the cabin as they stepped onto solid ground, unaware of the next, even more daring, phase of Cooper's plan. With the passengers gone, only Cooper, the flight crew, and the critical ransom remained on board. He then presented his final, most extraordinary demands for the plane's subsequent flight. The aircraft was to be refueled, then take off for Mexico City, flying at the lowest possible speed and an altitude not exceeding 10,000 feet. Crucially, he insisted that the rear air stair, a unique feature of the Boeing 727, remain lowered during the flight. This specific detail, seemingly innocuous to the uninitiated, began to raise questions among the seasoned pilots and FBI agents on the ground. Why would a hijacker demand such a thing, especially at cruising altitude? The implications slowly started to solidify, building a chilling anticipation for what was to come. The flight crew, under duress, complied with every demand. The plane was refueled, and once again, it ascended into the night sky, this time with only a skeleton crew and its enigmatic hijacker. As the aircraft climbed, the pilots, Captain Scott and First Officer William Radzak, along with flight engineer Harold E. Anderson, exchanged uneasy glances. The lowered rear air stair, flapping gently in the wind, was not merely a detail. It was the key to Cooper's impossible escape. It provided a direct, albeit perilous, access point to the vast, dark emptiness outside the plane. The realization dawned on them with a chilling certainty. Dan Cooper was not merely escaping. He was preparing to perform an act of aerial daring that defied logic and conventional wisdom. The empty seats, the hum of the engines, and the rushing wind through the open-air stair now painted a vivid picture of the audacious act about to unfold high above the Pacific Northwest. The stage was set for a plunge into the unknown. High above the rugged, forested terrain of Washington, under the cloak of a moonless, stormy night, Dan Cooper made his move. The Boeing 727, a silver phantom against the dark canvas, traversed the sky, its engines a steady roar. Inside, the remaining crew members held their breath, their eyes fixed on the rear of the aircraft where Cooper, calm and methodical, secured the money to his body. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the plane and the occasional shudder from the turbulent air currents. Then, with a decisive motion, Cooper unfastened his seatbelt and moved towards the open-air stair. A cold, biting wind immediately swept through the cabin, howling a mournful tune as it ripped past the opening. Rain lashed against the fuselage, blurring the already indistinct landscape below into a swirling vortex of black and gray. The crew watched, helpless and awestruck, as Cooper stood at the precipice, a silhouette against the raging storm. He paused for a fraction of a second, a moment suspended between the audacious plan and the terrifying reality. Then he launched himself backward into the howling abyss. There was no scream, no hesitation, just a sudden disappearance swallowed by the vast, dark emptiness. The air stair continued to buffet in the wind, a silent testament to the impossible act that had just transpired. The plane flew on, carrying its shaken crew and a payload of unanswered questions, leaving behind only the void where a man had been. Below, the storm raged, an indifferent witness to the unprecedented event. For the FBI, the immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of confusion and uncertainty. There was no exact landing spot. The primitive tracking technology of 1971 offered little more than a broad, imprecise geographical area. The vast, densely forested wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, already unforgiving, became an impenetrable labyrinth under the cover of night and the relentless downpour. Agents on the ground were left to grapple with the sheer enormity of their task, their resources stretched thin across an area that seemed to swallow all traces of human presence. The weather conditions alone presented a formidable challenge, amplifying the already profound mystery of Cooper's fate. The search began almost immediately, a desperate, sprawling effort across countless square miles of rugged terrain. Yet despite the mobilization of every available resource, the land yielded no immediate answers. There was no parachute tangled in the branches of ancient firs, no glint of metal from a briefcase, no sign of a body. The lack of immediate evidence of his survival or demise only served to deepen the enigma surrounding Dan Cooper. Had he survived the jump into the tempestuous night, navigating the treacherous descent with uncanny skill? Or had the harsh realities of the elements and the sheer height of his plunge claimed him? His body lost forever in the unforgiving wilderness, the FBI found themselves chasing a ghost, a phantom hijacker who had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. The vast forests of Washington held their secrets close, and the case of Dan Cooper quickly spiraled into one of the most perplexing and enduring mysteries in American history, a puzzle with no clear solution, only endless speculation. The FBI's response was unprecedented, launching one of the most extensive and expensive manhunts in American history. Thousands of agents, local law enforcement, and volunteers descended upon the Pacific Northwest, combing through every inch of the suspected drop zone. Every lead, no matter how small, was meticulously pursued, every fragment of information cataloged and analyzed. They were chasing not just a man, but the echo of an impossible act, an indelible stain on the nation's sense of security. The details left behind on Flight 305 became relics, scrutinized under microscopes, hoping to unlock the mystery of Dan Cooper. Upon landing, the aircraft itself was transformed into a forensic goldmine. Investigators painstakingly collected fingerprints from every surface Cooper might have touched, though the results were frustratingly inconclusive. The flight attendant, still reeling from the ordeal, provided a detailed description, which led to a composite sketch that would become iconic. But perhaps the most tantalizing clues were the physical items Cooper had left behind. 8 uncashed $20 bills and his black tie, still clipped to his seat. The tie, a seemingly mundane accessory, underwent rigorous examination. Forensic scientists meticulously analyzed every fiber, every speck of dust, hoping for a breakthrough. They even managed to find traces of metal on it, which would later become a significant, albeit perplexing, detail. The serial numbers on the ransom money, though mostly gone with Cooper, were also recorded, creating a unique identifier should any of the bills resurface. These pieces formed a puzzle, each lead a potential thread in a vast, intricate web, yet every thread seemed to unravel into nothingness. Despite the monumental efforts, the searches yielded agonizingly little. Vast terrains of rugged wilderness were scoured by search parties, helicopters flew low over tree lines, and divers probed icy rivers, but the dense canopy and treacherous landscape seemed to swallow all evidence. The sheer scale of the operation was immense, yet the results were dishearteningly meager. There were no signs of a parachute, no abandoned equipment, no trace of the $200,000, and most critically, no sign of Dan Cooper himself. It was as if he had simply dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only the chilling tale of his audacious jump. The absence of any physical trace amplified the mystery, deepening the enigma surrounding the hijacker. The fruitless combing of the vast forests and waterways inevitably led to a stark division in theories about Cooper's ultimate fate. One camp, grounded in grim realism, argued that his survival was simply impossible. The night was dark, the weather tempestuous, the landing unforgiving. The sheer altitude and the lack of proper equipment, combined with the extreme cold and the unknown terrain, pointed overwhelmingly to a fatal outcome. He must have perished on impact, his body lost to the elements, perhaps buried under layers of forest debris or swept away by the powerful currents of the Columbia River. This perspective painted Cooper as a desperate man on a suicidal mission, his daring act ultimately ending in tragedy. Conversely, another theory, fueled by the sheer audacity of his plan and the lack of a body, suggested that Dan Cooper had indeed survived. Proponents of this view pointed to his calculated precision, his seemingly expert knowledge of aircraft, and the meticulous planning that went into his escape. Perhaps he possessed specialized skills, a military background, or an intimate familiarity with the techniques of survival in such harsh conditions. The fact that no body was ever found, they argued, was not proof of death, but rather proof of his successful evasion. He was a ghost, a phantom who had slipped through the net of the FBI, perhaps living out his days anonymously, his secret held close. The lingering question of his survival versus a suicidal mission became the core of the enduring legend, a dramatic cliffhanger etched into the annals of American crime. The grim realities of the situation weighed heavily on the minds of many investigators. Arguments detailing why Dan Cooper should have died were compelling and numerous. The night he jumped was pitch black, a canvas of impenetrable darkness over the Pacific Northwest. The weather was tempestuous, with driving rain and biting winds that could easily disorient even an experienced skydiver. He was not equipped with a helmet, a crucial piece of safety gear, and his light clothing offered scant protection against the extreme cold of high altitude. Furthermore, the parachutes provided were not military-grade or designed for precision landings. They were rudimentary, static-line parachutes, one of which Cooper himself had rejected for being sewn shut. The sheer height of his jump, approximately 10,000 feet, combined with the lack of specialized equipment and the unforgiving terrain below, made his survival seem not just unlikely, but practically impossible. Many believed he must have succumbed to hypothermia, drowned in one of the many rivers, or simply been dashed against the jagged rocks of the mountainous region. This perspective painted a tragic end to his audacious scheme, a testament to the unforgiving power of nature. Yet counter-arguments persisted, whispers of survival that refused to be silenced. Proponents of Cooper's successful evasion pointed to his calculated risks and meticulous planning. His calm demeanor throughout the hijacking, his specific demands for certain types of parachutes, rejecting one that was unsuitable, and his apparent knowledge of aircraft operations suggested a man who was not merely desperate, but highly experienced. He had chosen the rear air stair, a unique exit point that offered a degree of protection from the wind shear, and he had tied the money bag securely to his body. These were not the actions of an amateur. Perhaps his choice of a relatively low altitude for the jump, around 10,000 feet, was deliberate, intended to minimize exposure to extreme cold and maximize his chances of survival upon landing. The absence of a body, they argued, was the most significant piece of evidence for his survival, not his demise. He was a phantom, a ghost who had outsmarted the FBI and vanished into the vast wilderness, perhaps to live a quiet life under a new identity, his secret meticulously guarded. Then, nearly a decade later, in 1980, the whispers of survival gained an unexpected, tangible form. 8 years after the daring jump, a young boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit on a sandbar along the Columbia River, near Vancouver, Washington. What he unearthed was nothing short of astonishing: 3 bundles of $20 bills, heavily deteriorated, but unmistakably linked to the Dan Cooper hijacking. The serial numbers matched those recorded by the FBI, confirming their authenticity. This dramatic discovery provided the first concrete evidence directly related to Cooper since his disappearance, reigniting the entire investigation and sending shockwaves through the public imagination. The discovery, however, raised more questions than it answered, creating an unsettling discrepancy that fueled the debate about Cooper's possible survival. The location where the money was found, known as Bar, was about 20 miles downstream from the FBI's projected landing zone. If Cooper had landed in the estimated area, how had the money traveled so far downstream and remained largely intact, despite being exposed to the elements for years? Was it swept there by the river's currents, perhaps after Cooper himself had perished and lost the money? Or did the money's presence so far from the initial drop zone suggest that Cooper had indeed survived, perhaps burying the cash himself at a later date, only for it to be unearthed by the shifting sands of time and the river? The riddle of the money's journey became another perplexing layer in the already dense mystery, making it harder than ever to determine whether the elusive Dan Cooper had truly cheated death. The FBI analysts were baffled, their meticulously calculated trajectories now undermined by the capricious nature of a river and the unexpected actions of a boy with a shovel. The tantalizing discovery of the ransom money intensified the long-standing public fascination with the identity of Dan Cooper, leading to a parade of suspects over the decades. Each new theory brought with it a wave of renewed speculation, only to eventually dissipate without definitive proof. Among the most prominent figures was Richard Floyd McCoy, a Vietnam veteran with a penchant for skydiving and a history of hijacking. In 1972, McCoy hijacked a United Airlines flight, demanding 4 parachutes and $500, $0, then parachuted from the plane over Utah. The similarities were striking, leading many, including some FBI agents, to believe he was Cooper. However, McCoy was later captured and killed during an escape attempt, and the FBI ultimately ruled him out, citing discrepancies in physical descriptions and his lack of specific knowledge about the aircraft's systems that Cooper seemed to possess. Another compelling suspect was Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and airline purser for Northwest Orient, the very airline Cooper had hijacked. Christensen bore a physical resemblance to the composite sketch of Cooper, and his intimate knowledge of aircraft, combined with his experience as a jumpmaster, made him a strong candidate. He was known to have purchased land and paid for it in cash around the time of the hijacking, and he exhibited a sudden change in lifestyle. However, like McCoy, Christensen was never definitively linked to the crime. He died in 1994, and the theory surrounding him emerged posthumously, leaving investigators with no direct way to confirm or deny his involvement. The FBI continued to investigate other individuals, including a man named Dwayne Weber, who on his deathbed allegedly confessed to his wife that he was Cooper, but forensic evidence, including DNA analysis of the tie, failed to establish a conclusive link. These fleeting glimpses of potential truth, however, could never solidify into certainty. The trail, already cold, continued to vanish with each passing year, each failed lead. In 2016, after 45 years of relentless pursuit, the FBI officially suspended its active investigation into the Dan Cooper case. The decision was not made lightly. It was a testament to the enduring mystery, the sheer elusiveness of the hijacker, and the insurmountable obstacles presented by the passage of time. All tips and leads were now directed to a cold case file, signifying the end of an era of active pursuit, and the official acknowledgement that Dan Cooper had effectively outsmarted one of the world's most formidable law enforcement agencies. The case became a permanent fixture in the annals of unsolved crimes, a defiant challenge to forensic science and detective work. Yet even in the twilight of the active investigation, a tiny, almost imperceptible clue emerged from the depths of the evidence vault. Advanced forensic analysis performed on the black clip-on tie Dan Cooper had left behind on Flight 305 revealed microscopic particles of titanium. This detail, initially overlooked, hinted at a potential profession for Cooper. Perhaps he worked in a metal fabrication plant, an aerospace facility, or an industrial setting where titanium was commonly handled. It was a tantalizing fragment of information, suggesting a life, a career, a context for the phantom hijacker, yet it provided no name, no face, no definitive identity. It was a whisper of a clue, too faint to illuminate the darkness that shrouded Cooper's true persona. The final enigma of Dan Cooper remains stubbornly unresolved. The prevailing theory, one that resonates with a certain poetic justice, is that Cooper, having successfully executed his audacious plan, simply faded into obscurity. He might have lived a full life under a new identity, the ransom money perhaps his nest egg, his secret meticulously guarded until his dying breath. He could have passed away peacefully in an anonymous grave, taking with him the truth of his daring escape and the details of his life before and after the jump. The vastness of the Pacific Northwest, with its rugged terrain and countless hidden corners, provided the perfect canvas for such a disappearance. Dan Cooper, the man who vanished into thin air with a fortune, became more than just a hijacker. He became a legend, a symbol of defiance against authority, forever enshrined in American folklore as the one who got away. His story continues to captivate, a testament to the human fascination with the unknown, leaving the audience to ponder the ultimate truth of the skyjacker who defied gravity and vanished into legend.